Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we're going to be doing a different kind of video as we are going to be doing a 2024 NFL mock draft. Now, that is not a 2024 Jacksonville Jaguars mock draft. This is an NFL mock draft. So, what that means is we're going to be making picks for every team in the NFL draft. This will be first round only today. If you guys like this video, you want me to continue this, you want to see day 2, I'm more than willing to do it, but I want to first see what you guys think about that and if this is something you all enjoy, because if it's not, we'll do something else with our content. But still want to give this a shot, give you guys some thoughts, and I think it's really good as well, whether you're a Jaguars fan or not, to have a better understanding of where these players can go. Like, what teams are you worrying about maybe your favorite prospect being drafted by before your pick? This is all important stuff. And so I want to try to be predictive with the way we go through this and give you guys an idea of where I think players will probably go. And a little bit of it will be some of what I do, but very little of that. I'm trying to be as predictive as I can. And so that's how we're going to treat this. But with that all said, I don't got much else to really explain about this. It's pretty simple. You guys probably all watch these quite a bit, so you know the drill. We're going to hop right into it. So, first overall pick comes from Carolina to Chicago. The Bears have an interesting choice because they have Justin Fields, who has gotten better every year. He shows the ability to be elite in some areas, especially as a rushing threat. And you saw him this year be able to break out as a passer. And so there's this clear, consistent progress to being a better quarterback. And that's an argument for why you might end up keeping him. However, there's also the conversation of when is he going to elevate the franchise around him? The Bears have not made the playoffs, and they weren't the worst team in the NFL this year. They got the first overall pick because they traded Carolina for it last year before it was the first overall pick. But the Chicago Bears came up short this year. As much as they did finish pretty strong, they still lost those games to Green Bay. That was a clear opportunity for Justin Fields to establish himself as the quarterback to change the precedence in Chicago, yet it just didn't happen. And so you're at a situation where you have the ability to draft a potentially elite player, someone who could be among the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL, whether or not you think that. It is a possibility with Caleb Williams. And you think as well for Chicago, this is a franchise that missed out on Patrick Mahomes however many years ago now. I think it was 7 drafts before this, back in 2017. Now we're in 2024. And so this is a team that I think would look at that like, let's correct our mistakes from the past. Let's get the prospect that is closest to Patrick Mahomes you're going to get in the type of player he is. Now, I'm going to be clear. I do not think he's going to end up being Patrick Mahomes. I think there are certain problems I have with his game and clear differences between what Mahomes does in the NFL now and what Williams has done as a player so far. I think what sets apart Mahomes from a guy like Williams is that you see Mahomes has elevated the team around him. He has a killer instinct. He knows how to win these games. Just last night, we watched him defeat a San Francisco team that was supposed to win that game, that dominated most of the game, but he finds a way to win consistently. And for Caleb Williams, I think this is an individual that he may mature. This may not really be a problem long term, but he's been very self-centered in the things he said, the way he's acted. There is a big pride issue there. And I think you saw that really have some consequences this year. And it was a big problem for him as a player, to the point where he was crying after one of the games because everything's just kind of collapsing around him. And so that doesn't have to define him. As much as I haven't liked him to this point, this doesn't have to be who he is. You've seen players who are able to mature at the next level, even throughout college. Spencer Rattler being an example of that, of a player who's matured very much throughout his career. And he's another prospect in this class. Won't talk about him, first round, obviously. But you see that in players. And maybe Caleb Williams can be that guy. And if he ends up elevating the franchise, being a team player, and being an X factor, then this is one of the best picks in franchise history, if not probably the best. So you have that possibility, which is very much a possibility. We're not talking about something extremely unlikely. This could happen. And the guy you have right now, as much as you like him, as much as you think he's a good football player, he has not elevated the franchise to this point. And so it makes it clear this has to be your draft selection at number 1. And for a team to trade up here, I just think the cost has got to be so extreme that I don't think a team's going to do it. I mean, you're probably talking about, just with teams looking at Williams like he is the next coming of Mahomes, if that's what they convince themselves of, you're talking about maybe 4 extra first rounders, just crazy numbers. And so I don't think that ends up happening. I think Chicago sits still here. I think they get their quarterback of the future, reset the rookie deal, and they've got their guy for a while, and they've still got the 9th pick in this draft, and they've got what they get from Justin Fields. So on that note, let's talk about Justin Fields really quick and what happens with him. So Fields is going to get traded somewhere. And the one team we keep hearing about constantly is the Atlanta Falcons. And that's where I'm going to have him go in this, because I think it makes a ton of sense. I don't think there's another team that's really close to Atlanta in terms of a logical fit for Fields. Because for one, it's his home team. It's a team that needs a quarterback. It's needed a quarterback for so long. They're at 8th overall. They don't want to give that up. If they're using that on a quarterback, they're probably going to have to trade up unless they think J.J. McCarthy is the guy. And at this point, like, personally, I'd rather have Justin Fields than J.J. McCarthy. So I think for Atlanta, this is a logical choice. Plus, you have a defensive kind of coach coming in. Get someone with some experience who has a ton of upside and is going to have weapons around him that he can utilize. You have the potential to have a really explosive offense and to really change the story on Fields' career if he goes to the Atlanta Falcons. So that's what we're going to have in this scenario. I have it for pick 43. Exactly what it would be, I don't know. That's my guess right now. Tons of upside with Fields. I think it could be a second. And it might be a conditional trade based on his performance for all we know. I've seen a lot of those recently. So that's the trade we're going to have going here for Fields. So he's heading to Atlanta, and Caleb Williams is a Chicago Bear. So we'll start moving now. We're going to get through some of these picks, and this is where we have more talk about maybe some different options. Because for the Washington Commanders, Drake May and Jaden Daniels are the clear top options. And you have to go quarterback because this team has not had a franchise quarterback in forever. And you thought Robert Griffin was that maybe for a little bit, but obviously terrible injury luck, things that just changed him as a football player. And so that is something that, just sucks, but you got to move on. And obviously they have. It's a long time ago now, but you got to get your future quarterback. And so I think you're looking between Drake May and Jaden Daniels pretty clearly here. J.J. McCarthy should in no world, even if he's seen by the NFL a lot better as what like media does and what fans do, in no world should he be in consideration for the 2nd overall pick right now. So between Drake May and Jaden Daniels, I think it's really close. I think it's a lot closer than what May is to Caleb Williams. And it's really a question of what kind of quarterback you want to have. And there's a lot of smoke about Drake May falling right now to like 5 or 6. I think it's crazy. I just don't see that as an option. And I think that he's got to go at this pick or the next pick, and it's probably going to be at number 2. May is a player that has got incredible upside, phenomenal size for the position too. It's 6'4", like 230 pounds. Really good physical profile we're talking about. He is the prototype of what you build around. And for Adam Peters, I feel like you want to take that kind of player over Jaden Daniels, who could be phenomenal, but the build for him and the way he plays, it's very similar to what Justin Fields does. Reminds me of him a lot. But with Justin Fields, obviously, in this scenario, he's being traded. He's probably going to in real life anyway. I just don't think that's necessarily your best option of the two. And I don't think it's by far, but May would be the guy I would go with. I think it's safer. You get a phenomenal passer and you start building your franchise around him. You really just start things off with a bang for that new regime. So Drake May is going to be our pick here at number 2. The other thing as well with May that I think has to be factored in, I think that May is going to be a more durable quarterback in the NFL. He's got more size to him. He doesn't run as often as what Jayden Daniels does. He's very much capable of it, but you're going to be safe having a guy like Drake May over Jayden Daniels because we've seen Daniels take some huge hits in college, and I think he's someone who probably needs to bulk up a little bit for the NFL. Now, New England Patriots. I think you got two options here, two very clear options. First one is you get the third best quarterback in Jayden Daniels. And it's not third best by far. I think it's close to second, but I still have him at third, like I've said. The other option is that you go out and you get Marvin Harrison Jr. And that's not a pick you regret. I think even if Jayden Daniels is a really good quarterback, Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be so good that you're just not going to be living in a world where you're going to regret having him as a player on your team. I mean, this is the kind of guy you bring in for life. And so I'd be fine going either direction here, but I think for the Patriots, that it's going to end up being a quarterback. I think it has to be. You know, I look at the rumors around Mac Jones being traded this offseason. I look at the free agent market, a lot of players that I don't think are going to be there. And the ones who are, I just don't think they're good enough. I don't think it's how you start off your first year as a head coach. You know, especially when your team's already been bad. You know, you're not doing that season of necessarily resetting everything. You're already rebuilding. So for them, you know, I look at this quote by Gerard Mayo that I found earlier today, where he says in these exact words, we're going to draft the best player for a position that is very important. You can put the pieces together. And what does that mean? It means quarterback. Is wide receiver really important? Yes. But when you put that much emphasis on the importance of the position, and if you watch the clip, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's pretty clear you're talking about quarterback. And there's going to be a really good player there, and there is in this scenario in every single one, with Jayden Daniels being on the board here. So he's going to be our pick at 3. New England ends up getting a new quarterback. So now we have a very easy pick here. This is best case scenario for the Arizona Cardinals. If you're a Cardinals fan, you're just hoping for 3 quarterbacks to go off the board, and you get the best player in the draft as of now. Marvin Harrison Jr. to me is going to be like the next coming of Larry Fitzgerald for that team. And what I mean by that is not necessarily all the play style stuff, but I'm talking about getting an elite receiver that has outstanding character. He's going to be loved by the fans, loved by the team, someone that you draft for life. And I think that's just an immeasurably important asset for a team like Arizona to get, to have those guys that you base your franchise around. You know, those names that are automatically recognized when you talk about your team. Kyler Murray, I think, is one right now, obviously, because he's the quarterback. You're also talking about maybe Budda Baker. But outside of that, those are really the only guys. There's other good players, but those are the people you think about. And so Marvin Harrison Jr. becomes one of those names in this scenario, ends up being an immeasurably important player for the Arizona Cardinals. And I'll tell you right now, if he goes here in the draft, he's playing with Kyler Murray. If you play fantasy football, pick up Marvin Harrison Jr. Do yourself a favor. So pick 5, Los Angeles Chargers. Now, with the Chargers, it's an interesting one because there's a lot of different directions. I don't know how terribly tackles need. I don't think they have to address that. But you have clear needs, potentially at wide receiver. You have a clear need possibly at tight end. You're talking about pass rush as well because Joey Bosa is apparently being put out on the trade block. Khalil Mack is going to cost you way too much. You're $40 million over in cap space. This is a team that has a lot of options on where they can go and would probably be best off trading back in the draft to get more capital, to have more picks to throw, more darts to throw at the dartboard. You know, you're going to have a better shot of getting great players, and this is a really good class around this point. However, you have to find a team to trade up with you. And that's where I kind of struggled in this spot because I look at teams that would want a quarterback because as much as I don't think JJ McCarthy should go like 5 or 6, there is a lot of talk about him going there right now. And it sounds legitimate. Everything you hear from NFL coaches, from NFL people, JJ McCarthy is looked at really high by NFL teams. And so we have to consider the idea of a team moving up here, trying to jump maybe the New York Giants, who I don't think will take a quarterback, but it's possible they consider it. But you're just trying to get up the board to be that first team to draft him if you really believe in him. So this is a spot where I look at that for, but it's the question of who does it. Because the Atlanta Falcons, like we said, Justin Fields goes to him in this scenario. You look at New York Jets, I don't think that's the right investment right now. You need to get a tackle. You need to build for the future, and I mean the immediate future. You need to be great these next 2 years because those are probably the only 2 years you have with Aaron Rodgers. The Minnesota Vikings are an option, but I think they end up getting Kirk Cousins back, and if they draft a quarterback, they're probably looking for a good kind of value pick, someone who's going to fall down the board. Michael Penix will be an example of that. Really good player that will probably end up falling because of the injuries. So that's probably what Minnesota's looking at. And then you talk about Broncos and the Raiders. Those are division rivals. It's really scary to go make a deal with a division rival to help them get a quarterback because you could end up regretting that for the next 20 years. Now, do I think that'd be the case with J.J. McCarthy? Not necessarily, but keep in mind, Jim Harbaugh is the coach of the Los Angeles Chargers here. So he's going to very much look at him like a great prospect. And after that point, probably the only team that's realistic from there is the Seahawks, and that's a really far jump. I don't think they do that in the first year of Mike Macdonald. So I think the Chargers end up staying put. I don't think they have the trade partner realistically. Maybe the Titans would consider it, but I don't think they end up doing it in this scenario. So you end up having the Chargers staying here, and I look at the needs, I look at the players on the board. I think talking about a guy like Brock Bowers, there's going to be a need because Gerald Everett is probably going to hit free agency, and he's probably going to get signed by another team. The Chargers just don't have the money to throw at all their players. And I think Everett is one who ends up walking. Then you look at receivers like Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze. For those guys, I think you look at what's there already and what's likely going to stay there. I think Mike Williams gets traded or ends up getting released. But you look at Keenan Allen, I think he sticks around. I think he's just too good to let go at this point. You can't let go of both receivers. And then you obviously have your pick and Quentin Johnston, who, as much as the rookie year was bad, you have to still try to believe in him at least for another year. And I think he will get better. So receiver, you could use someone, but they do have that depth there to where they don't have to. I think not only is tight end a little bit bigger of a need here, but you have probably the best player on the board at tight end. And it's really close between him and Neighbors for me. But I would end up going Brock Bowers at this point. And if anyone's going to know all about it, it's going to be the college coach coming into the NFL that's got to see Brock Bowers play. And he knows how good he is. And that's going to be a pick that I think the Chargers end up loving for a long time because you get a very reliable tight end that's going to be great for you for probably over a decade. Ask the Chiefs how that went. So that's what I got here. Now, number 6, got the New York Giants. And this is where a trade happens. Our first one of the draft for a draft pick swap. So I'm going to have the Raiders move up here. Because the way I see it, the teams I'm looking at moving up is going to be the Raiders and the Broncos. The Broncos are ahead of the Raiders here. They're going to feel more secure. I also think they're going to like some of the other prospects more. Bo Nix, for example, will be a player they're probably looking at pretty closely because of the comps that he gets to Drew Brees. You got Sean Payton there. He knows how good Brees was. That would be a logical pick for the Broncos, and he's arguably a pro-ready quarterback at this point, guy with a lot of experience. So I think the Raiders are probably the team that moves up here, and they go out, they get a really good prospect who's very sound, a lot to work with, and a lot of potential there, whether or not everyone sees it. So that's going to be our trade here. As far as what they need to give up, we have got 13, 44, and 150 going to the Giants for pick number 6. So here, Raiders move up. You got to go pretty far down the PFF board, but they are going to pick J.J. McCarthy out of Michigan. And like I said, this is predictive. This is not what I would do. If I was the Raiders, I would not want to be picking J.J. McCarthy at 6th overall, but the way that the NFL teams do this is very much different. And some team is probably going to move up and pick him, or at least pick him in this range. So that's what we got going on here. Now, pick number 7, Tennessee Titans. This is really easy for me. You need offensive line. Sure, you can argue you need another receiver as well. However, your quarterback got injured multiple times last year. All of your quarterbacks have been injured multiple times because it is a very bad offensive line. You got Skoronski last year, really good investment, but you need to do more. And the best guy on the board at this point is Joe Alt. And it's not only that, but it's the fit that he has to Tennessee because of his athletic profile. This is the guy who can move around really well. And you look at Brian Callahan's scheme, where he comes from Cincinnati. He's going to want these guys to be able to pull well, to be able to move. He wants them to be athletic. And so Joe Alt is a perfect fit for Tennessee. You get the top tackle. You feel really good about being able to make this pick at this point. So now we get to 8 and 9. I'm going to kind of talk about these together because it's the same scenario to me. Now, the way this board fell, you end up having receiver fall more than maybe expected because you get the Brock Bowers pick, which I don't think is crazy. This is where he should go. He's that good of a prospect. He should be revered, similar to what Kyle Pitts was before he came into the NFL. And then you got J.J. McCarthy, a player that people are talking about like he's going to be a top 10 pick, and he might even be top 5, which obviously, big question about that is if a team trades with the Chargers, like we talked about. But you get through those picks, you got Neighbors here, you got Odunze here. The Titans feel like they got to go offensive line. You can justify Joe Alt. The value is really close to what you get out of a Neighbors or an Odunze. So I look at the Falcons, I look at the Bears, and I see two teams that have new quarterbacks coming in this scenario. They have one reliable receiver on the roster coming into this as well. Now, we don't know what's happening in free agency, of course. Not projecting a ton here. But for the Falcons, you have Drake London, who's a bigger guy. He's a contested catch guy. He's more of your X receiver, just big overall build, good route runner. And then for the Bears, you have DJ Moore, who everyone knows all about. Phenomenal trade for them. So the Falcons are going to be looking for a receiver, and I think the Bears are going to be looking for a receiver. And both teams in this scenario are guaranteed one of the best ones in the draft. For the Falcons, I end up going Malik Neighbors here, because Malik Neighbors is a really good complement to what Drake London does, because he has a different skill set he brings. And like Drake London, he is a younger player. I think he comes into the draft right around 21 years old. So that's about the best you're going to get out of a player. You're going to have him for a long time. And this is a guy that when I watch him, he reminds me a little bit of Justin Jefferson from LSU. I mean, he looks very similar as far as the college tape. Now, do I think he'll have the same success? That's doubtable, because you're talking about best receiver in the NFL, or at least like top 3. So it's hard to say that, but I think he's going to be a wide receiver 1 in the NFL, and he's going to be a damn good one. So if you're Atlanta, you bring in Justin Fields, you need him to work out, that's your goal. Surround him with more talent. That's more important than going out and getting like a Dallas Turner here. So I end up going Malik Neighbors in this scenario for the Falcons. I do want to note for Jaguars fans here, in this scenario, I think this is somewhere where Jacksonville would consider trying to trade up. And you might have some other teams around here consider calling up as well. Because if you're looking for a receiver and they start to fall down the board a bit, The Falcons and Bears are going to be getting phone calls here because you've got two very good players that should have had the possibility of going around this range. The board falls to where it doesn't happen. You are not going to regret trading an extra pick, a second or first, whatever it ends up being, to go get a guy like Malik Nabers or Rome Odunze. You're going to be very happy making that move because you get one of the best players in this class. These are all wide receiver one potential guys. So I think Jacksonville would consider that, and some other teams would. But why I don't have that projected is because I think for like Jacksonville, you see what Trent Baalke does with trades. He usually takes trades that he can't lose. He takes trades where he doesn't have to give up that much. He always has trades where he has the advantage. And so this is a scenario where there is going to be a lot you're going to have to pay to move up to 8 for this kind of player because it's the perfect fit for these teams. And I don't think Trent Baalke pulls the trigger on that kind of move. So that's why we're going to have these picks stay where they are. Players are going to go to the teams that are currently at these selections. So Malik Nabers to the Falcons. He ends up being a really good fit because he complements very well what Drake London does, gives them a second receiver. And then you look at the Chicago Bears. Rome Odunze, he's the best outside receiver here right now. You could use outside or inside. I think ideally for them, Nabers would be the better fit. But at the same time, both are very useful. The Falcons pick first, so they're going to end up going Odunze for this pick. Now we get to pick number 10. And this is another really easy pick for me. Because if you're the Jets, clearly the big thing you got to do is make sure you protect Aaron Rodgers. And we aren't projecting any kind of free agency stuff here, so clearly you still have the need. So you're going to be looking for a great pass protector, and then second, someone who's going to be good in the long run, because the way this team has built itself, the next 2 years are what's important. After that, you're going to be in cap hell. You're going to have no quarterback on the roster. You're going to be kind of rebuilding things a bit. So you're looking for the guy who's going to be great as a pass protector now out of all these options, and then after that, hopefully a really good long-term player. And it's a guy who does both for you. Because Fashanu, the hit on him is the run blocking. And if you get a guy who's a great pass protector, year one, maybe struggles as a run blocker, you're fine with that. Because the important thing is keeping Aaron Rodgers healthy. You compare that to like Fuaga, where I think he's a phenomenal player, but if he plays tackle, he might be more of an average pass blocker because he struggles to defend the edge. What would you rather have? It's going to be Fashanu. And then all these other guys, I think there's a lot more questions about. So really easy pick here for me with the Jets to take Olu Fashanu. Now pick 11. Get to the Minnesota Vikings. This is a team that needs defensive help, right? And so if they need defensive help, they're pretty dang happy because you look at all these picks, do you see any defensive players? No. And it's crazy that's the case, but this is how many good offensive players we have. So you get to Minnesota, and they're looking at the board, and they're taking the best defensive player at this point because I think whatever player that is, he's probably best on the board, arguably. And so in this scenario, I would go with Dallas Turner because when you look at Minnesota, there's other needs you can look at too, right? But you have Danielle Hunter, who could end up walking, especially in this scenario because Cousins gets extended for a couple more years. But you also have the question of the other side already, even if Hunter comes back. Now, I know they got like DJ Wanham. He was relatively productive, but there's not so much there that you can't consider adding a super upside player like Dallas Turner. So that's where I end up going with this pick. I think he'll be the highest rated edge rusher just because of the potential and the fact that you see him growing every year. So I really like this addition for the Vikings at number 11. Now we get to number 12. We get to the Broncos. And this is where our next quarterback goes. And he'll be the only quarterback to go for a while. I already alluded to this earlier, but for the Broncos, Russell Wilson is going to be gone. That's not their guy. They're not going to keep him. Clearly there was bad blood there from the start between him and Sean Payton. They want to get their guy. They're going to have to draft one. There's not going to be the options out there in free agency to where Sean Payton's going to keep his job. So we end up going with Bo Nix here because Bo Nix, I think, is going to be a really good fit for that team because of how similar he is to Drew Brees. Now, not saying he's going to be as great as Drew Brees, but I think it's a similar prospect with a lot of experience coming into the NFL. I think he's someone you can rely on. He's very tough mentally. That's a team that you're going to need your quarterback to be mentally tough because there's a lot of crap to go through on that team right now. I really like Bo Nix to go there. I think he's a really good fit. And like I said earlier, I think it's possible they trade up for J.J. McCarthy, but I don't think they're the most likely of these teams to trade up for J.J. McCarthy. I think they're one of the least likely. So we go with Bo Nix here. Now, pick number 13. So we get to the Giants, who trade back with the Raiders at number 6. So the Giants got some extra draft capital. Feeling good about that. And you have a really good option here in Talisé Fuaga. And why I'd go Fuaga at this point is because you don't necessarily have to give up on Evan Neal in this scenario. Because the way I see it, I think Fuaga is an elite right guard at the next level. And if he plays right tackle, I don't think he's as good of a player. But if you need him to, he can. And so this brings in a challenge for Evan Neal. It brings in someone who's going to try to elevate his gameplay because he has to elevate it if he wants to succeed. And obviously the better player is going to be out at tackle. But you're going to find a way for both these guys to start. You're going to fill a need no matter what. I think it's a really good balance of both worlds for the Giants. And you're just getting a damn good football player. I think he's the best one on the board here. So Fuaga is very much my choice for the Giants at number 13. And you get that extra draft capital as well. So now we get to 14. And I think this is the last trade-up opportunity you really have for the Jaguars. And I want to note that because you will see at 15 and 16, the two players that you may very well like to go to Jacksonville are probably going to end up going off there. I think it's very likely. And we'll get to those players in a moment. But I want to note that because you can't trade with a division rival. If you're moving up to 16, I think you're still going to have to give up a lot because you're probably moving up for the player that the Seahawks want to take there. Because otherwise, there's no point to it. So this is kind of your last opportunity at 14 and probably the most likely. Because you jump your division rival and you jump a team with some similar needs on the interior of the offensive line. So with the Saints pick here, I ended up going with Jared Verse. And the reason why I did that was because this pick to me, it's either pass rusher or tackle. And I feel like Verse compared to the tackles is a much safer player. I think he's just as good of a player. Because I look at like Latham, for example, tons of penalties. He needs some refinement still. There's a lot of potential, but I'm not completely sold on him being a success in the NFL. And then the other guys, I think it's even worse because you're talking about Guyton, who has very little experience. He's going to have a learning curve to go through. Now, there's immense upside. It might be the best player out of this, but there's a lot of risk, especially at 14th overall. And then Amarius Mims, you're talking about a guy who's barely played at all in college. So it's really hard for me to bet on that. The tools are there, but you've got the injury questions as well. So Jared Verse feels like the best guy because the Saints pass rush really didn't have a lot of production last year. I think through like 11 weeks of the season, they had 18 sacks as a team. That's really bad. And you got Cameron Jordan, who's 34 years old now. I mean, he's going to be retiring soon. So you're getting a guy who I feel like he's a pro's pro. He's been a very good player for quite a while now. He's going to be an impact good starter for you from the beginning. I just don't know if he's like, necessarily an elite player in the NFL. I think he's going to be a very good player. So that's what you're getting in Jared Verse. Makes a lot of sense to go to a team like the New Orleans Saints. Now we get to 15 with the Colts. And I went Terrion Arnold with this pick because when I look at their roster, cornerback's a big need. You have Juju Brents, that's under contract. He was injured part of this year as well. Kenny Moore is a free agent. And you really don't have anyone else that you can trust on that team that's under contract. So obviously, corner is going to be a need. And you look at the board and you get your pick of whatever cornerback in this entire class you want. So you go get the best guy. The debate's probably between Terrion Arnold and Quinyon Mitchell. I think Terrion Arnold would be the guy I'd have above him because I think he's going to be able to better play all over the field to do everything. Whereas Quinyon, if you're talking about him playing in the slot, there's a little more projection because the experience isn't there. He's coming from a smaller school. I just think that Terrion's going to be maybe a little more prepared for the NFL. Now, with that said, there's things I love about Quinyon Mitchell more than Terrion Arnold too. But I still have Terrion Arnold above Quinyon Mitchell on my board, and I think he's a better fit for the Indianapolis Colts. So that's where they're going to go with this pick. And that's the first one I talked about, where that's a player you could like for Jacksonville. It would be a favorite of mine. But he's probably going to go in this range. Very likely he goes to the Colts. Now, you look at the Seahawks, and this is another one here. I think the Seattle Seahawks are probably going to be the team, if no one moves up in front of them, that takes Jackson Powers Johnson. Because I think what Powers Johnson did at the Senior Bowl firmly established him as the top interior offensive lineman in this class. You look at the Seahawks offensive line, they feel like they have their bookends, but you look at the interior, a lot of questions there. You got guys who are walking, guys who haven't played good enough. You want to protect your quarterback, you want to be able to run the ball. You get Jackson Powers Johnson. I think you have an elite player in the NFL, someone who can play any of those interior offensive line spots. It's a player that's going to be really hard to miss on. I just don't see a world where he's not good in the NFL. So it's an easy pick. It's a need. You go after that and you feel great about it. Now, other targets, if they don't go after Jackson Powers Johnson, if they feel like it's a bit too rich, I think this could possibly a Laiatu Latu landing. They do need edge help. I think if Latu doesn't have the injury concerns, he goes earlier than this in the draft. However, that is a major issue with his projection to the NFL right now. And the other one that might be a little crazy, maybe not, would be Michael Penix. I think he would be a great fit for Seattle going to another offense with a great wide receiver core. But I haven't heard as much as I expected to on Seattle's interest in Michael Penix. So I'm not going to project that there because I think that's more so me doing something that I'd like to see rather than what I think happens. And so in this scenario, I go with what I think is likely, even if I don't like to see it as a Jaguars fan, and you have Jackson Powers Johnson go off the board at number 16. Now, kind of a rough scenario for Jacksonville there, right? Because you got two players that you'd love to take here go off the board. But I'm being realistic about this because I don't think Trent Baalke is going to offer enough to these teams to be able to move up. He's very, very hard-nosed when it comes to trades. And so I just don't think it happens as much as I would love it to. I would love to trade up for Jackson Powers Johnson. I think it'd be a great pick. It'd be hard to miss. But even in this scenario, you still have a damn good football player on the board. And you got quite a few if you do want to trade back. But with this pick, I end up having the Jacksonville Jaguars stay in place. And, well, it could have easily been Jackson Powers Johnson. He's not here. I think he had to move up to 14 to get him, and the Jaguars end up targeting a cornerback instead in Quinyon Mitchell. And so with Quinyon Mitchell, this is how I look at it. Jacksonville's defense is going to change this year. You got Ryan Nielsen coming in. They're going to probably switch to more man coverage. You want to be ready to play that. And so the offseason is going to be built for teams to adjust their roster to fit the personnel. During the season is when the personnel is adjusted to fit the roster. So right now, there's flexibility in what they do with that cornerback room. Even if they don't move off of, say, Darius Williams through a trade, you can still probably bring in Quinyon Mitchell, have him be a slot starter, and then eventually have him move outside when the spot opens up at some point. So Quinyon has value to you somewhere on this team no matter what. I really do believe that. And you get a guy who played phenomenal in man coverage throughout the Senior Bowl, other than the one rep against Roman Wilson, which happens to the best of us sometimes. But he has played phenomenal. And this is a dude who has a ton of upside, looks like the real deal. He proved it all at the Senior Bowl. I really do feel that way. And it's hard to imagine that the Jaguars take a guy like Tyler Guyton over him. I think Kool-Aid McKinstry might be possible. And then Brian Thomas Jr. might be if Calvin Ridley ends up walking. But in this scenario, we're going to go defense. We're going to get Quinyon Mitchell for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So now we're going to run through the rest of the first round so you guys can have an idea of who's on the board. And of course, for all the fans that would end up watching this being fans of these teams. So Cincinnati Bengals, number 8 team. I don't think this is a team that can screw around with the offensive line anymore. They've tried it for too long, hasn't worked out. They got close to a Super Bowl. Now they're really far away because of their decision making. Didn't make the playoffs last year. Why is that? Because your quarterback got hurt. And so you got to do something about it. As much as the tackles have gone off the board, at least the ideal ones, which really is 3 guys, the 3 who've gone off here, Fuaga, Fashanu, and Alt, I think that as the Bengals, you can still feel pretty good about going after a player like J.C. Latham. Now, one thing I don't like about his fit there, I would have some questions about his ability to be in a really athletic scheme. Now, I do think it'll be good enough. You do see, I think Orlando Brown is a larger tackle as well, so you can survive with J.C. Latham going over there. But this is a guy I think is going to be a really good pass protector from the start. Has a little bit of refinement left. My main issue with him is really just the penalties. It's the constant, not the constant lapses, but the occasional lapses in his blocking. But I look at the other options, and this is the clear one to me. I mean, Amarius Mims barely has any snaps in college football. Tyler Guyton is still going to be a very big project. You want to compete now? I think J.C. Latham is your best opportunity to do that. The other guy you could throw out might be like Jordan Morgan. I think Morgan is probably going to be a guard in the NFL at some point because, similar to Fuaga, kind of struggles to protect the edge. I feel like he doesn't respond well to things. So, to me, J.C. Latham is the best player on the board here, especially for what Cincinnati needs at tackle. So that's where we're going to go. And in pick 19, we're going to have a trade here. Haven't had one for a little bit. You've got a really good player on the board in Laiatu Latu that could end up going to the Rams, but the Rams have quite a few needs and quite a few players that could fit those needs. See a lot of cornerbacks sitting on the board here, and you even got a little bit of tackle available. So you look at that, you look at an edge here as well, and you feel like you can trade back, and you know that you can pick well on day 2 and in day 3 because they proved that last year. So this is a team I think that would very much consider it. A team that I think would trade up in this scenario will be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. In this, I'm going to have them give up 26, 89, and 204 for pick 19. And so the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are trading up because you look at their defensive line, they have a good interior, they have Yaya Diaby on the outside, and then the rest of the defense got a lot of older prospects, and then you're talking about like secondary. They very much have the ability to bring in a really good edge rusher and have a spot for him to play and have an impact for that defense. I think they can improve their pass rush. They can really go out and round out that unit with a pick like Laiatu Latu, someone I think is going to transition really well, be productive. I think if you didn't have the injuries, he would be talked about in a similar light to recent top pass rushers like Will Anderson. I almost said Will McDonald. You could talk about maybe Aiden Hutchinson, maybe not at that exact same level, but one of the better pass rushers to come out in these recent years, if not for the injury concerns. So it makes a lot of sense for Tampa Bay for that reason. And if you feel comfortable with the medical stuff, you're getting a potential top 10 player at pick 19. So really good pick for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers there. Now pick 20. Get to the Pittsburgh Steelers. The thing that stood out when I looked at the Steelers team was cornerback. They had enough this year, but there's too many players going this next year, and you really look at what's there, it's just Joey Porter Jr. It's the only player you know is going to be on that roster. So you need to consider getting someone young who can start alongside him and getting someone who plays kind of a similar game to him, fits that defense. And so I think of Joey Porter Jr., I think of a press man corner. When I think of another press man corner in this, I would go to either Nate Wiggins or I'd go to Kool-Aid McKinstry. But I'd do that with Kool-Aid McKinstry over Nate Wiggins. I think he's got better size to be able to compete like that. But McKinstry, he's a really good prospect in this class. He might go earlier than this, but he's got to go somewhere around this range. He's that good of a player. It's just a very crowded draft class. And so Pittsburgh, I think, would love the idea of pairing up Kool-Aid McKinstry with Joey Porter Jr. and really just solidifying those outside cornerback spots. So that's where we're going to go with pick 20. Now we get to 21. And this is going to be another trade for us. And thinking behind this is for the Dolphins, I look at interior offensive line and interior defensive line because of the players who are going to be leaving this season. I don't think those were necessarily problems this last year, but they're more so that you're going to have some players walking out the door because you don't have the money to pay them all. And there's more people walking out on the interior offensive line. Now you have multiple options at both of those spots. Defense, you could talk about Jerzon Newton, who's taken a bit of a fall here. You could talk about Byron Murphy. If you want to, you could even talk about Leonard Taylor, who would be local to Miami. You're looking at interior offensive line. You got a lot of options there as well. You could be talking about Jordan Morgan, because I think he could play guard. You could be talking about Troy Fautanu, or even a Zach Frazier, or a Graham Barton. So the point is, there's a lot of players that would be really good picks for the Dolphins that I have ranked pretty similar at this point. And maybe you could stay put for Jerzon Newton, but I think there's another team that would consider moving up to 21 overall and taking Jerzon Newton over some teams that would either be rivals or be wanting to take that player. And for me, that's the Dallas Cowboys. So I have them giving up 24 and 124 for pick 21. Now for the Cowboys, obviously, last year they drafted Mazi Smith. And you're not saying you're giving up on Mazi Smith, but you look at where these guys play. Mazi Smith is mostly interior. Jerzon Newton has lined up all over the defense for Illinois. He can play at defensive end if you need him to. So you will find a spot for Newton to play on that defensive line. They need to improve their run defense. I think Newton very well helps with that aspect of the game. I think he's a lot more pro-ready than what Mazi Smith was last year. So sure, you're going back kind of to the same well, but you're going to get a really good player who's going to make an impact and should not be available at this point of the draft. But that's inevitable. Players are going to fall in this scenario and in every scenario. So Jerzon Newton ends up going to the Dallas Cowboys here. Now, do I think the Eagles would have taken him? Probably not. But I think you look at like the Houston Texans, that's the team I'm trading up over. That's why I'm moving up for Dallas. And also, of course, Miami Dolphins at 21. Now you get to 22. I guess this one I'll probably keep the same for a while. We'll see how things develop in Philadelphia. But I think for them, they try to stay ahead of things by a year on most of their decisions. And so to be able to do that, I think the player I look at for them is Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma. They like these very high upside players. They like to get a lot of those guys, like the freak athletes and stuff. And you saw like Jordan Davis go there recently, just crazy size. I think for the Eagles, talk about Tyler Guyton, because Guyton's size is ridiculous. His movement skills are ridiculous. Tons of upside. But you look at Lane Johnson, their right tackle on that team, came out of Oklahoma. They've had success drafting out of that school. You get another guy, you can give a year to develop. You don't have to necessarily start him right off the bat, but he can come in and help you out. And eventually he's going to be a starter for your team. So Philadelphia continues to do the same thing in this scenario. Picks a really high upside, good athlete at tackle in Tyler Guyton. Now we get to pick 23 for the Houston Texans. And the Texans, you could go a few different options. I think one that could be considered, but I probably won't project them, is wide receiver. Because you look at it and you think, okay, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, and John Mechie. Can you get another starter there? Yeah, you could. You could upgrade over like John Mechie. But, Tank Dell and Nico Collins, the way they've played, I think they're absolutely starters. I don't think you're thinking about moving on from them. But keep in mind, this team invested a second round pick in a John Mechie recently. You have Xavier Hutchinson, who you drafted as well. I think you've got other players there as well. There's a lot of investments at receiver. It's not a position I think they're going to put any more in, at least for a little bit, until something goes wrong or just until some of these players get close to their contracts ending. So I look at defensive line because they've got some free agents there they're probably going to have to consider replacing. And so I end up going with Byron Murphy for this pick out of Texas. They go local. You're getting another defensive line reinforcement specifically to replace Sheldon Rankins. You're going to continue to strengthen the emphasis on Houston's defense. You think about DeMeco Ryans, the thing that he has tried to do from the start there is build a strong defensive line. He started with picking up Will Anderson in the draft, making additions off of the waiver wire like Tierre Tart. You continue to do this and getting a young, refined player in Byron Murphy who has a lot of upside, really good leverage player, and I think could have some good early production for the Houston Texans. So that's where we're going to go at 23. So you get to 24 for Miami, and with Jer'Zhan Newton and Byron Murphy going off the board, makes it pretty clear your focus is going to be on the interior here. I could have considered Jordan Morgan, but I end up going with Fetanu because I think Fetanu is just going to be the better player in the NFL. I think he's got things figured out more. I love the punch that he has on his initial blocks. I think he's phenomenal with that. He's a player I really like for the Miami Dolphins. Now, he played left tackle for Washington. I think he can kick inside a left guard or right guard, fill in one of those spots for Miami. And so they'll probably end up needing a player at one of those positions. That's why I'm going to have Troy Fautanu going to the Dolphins. Now, you could also consider, if you want to go a different route, maybe a Zach Frazier, if you want to be really high on him, and then Graham Barden. So those would be some other players. It's pretty close, but I'm going to go with Fautanu here. Now, pick 25 for the Packers. This came down to secondary for me. I think they've got a lot of the air positions figured out right now, but you see some clear needs there. You've got players like Jair Alexander that are really good, but you don't know the future of them on the team. And so it comes down to Cooper DeJean or Nate Wiggins at that pick. And for me, I think the way I look at it is that I think you have your outside guys at cornerback right now. You consider that you have a need at safety. Nate Wiggins is more of an outside player. Cooper DeJean, probably more pro ready as well. A phenomenal athlete, can play anywhere in the secondary. I'd probably go Cooper DeJean in that scenario because I think you get more out of him. And I think you're being safer with the pick. Now, I would not fault them at all for going Nate Wiggins. I think it's immense upside there. Could be the best cornerback in this class, arguably. But Cooper DeJean, I think, helps with the need a little bit more, and you're being safe. So we're going to take him at 25. You're going to get to the Los Angeles Rams, and for them, I think you were just picking whoever didn't go to Green Bay here. Because these guys are kind of separated when you're looking at the secondary positions. So Nate Wiggins, it's a clear need for them. Need outside corners. Nate Wiggins is an outside corner. Tons of potential, like I just said. Had one of the best man coverage grades, I think, out of pretty much any cornerback in college. Although they do run a lot of zone, but he's good at both. That's the good thing for you. So Nate Wiggins is going to be able to do it all for you. You just want him to bulk up a bit. He's going to be our pick at 26 for the Rams. So now we're starting to get into these last picks, winding down. And this is where teams are going to consider moving up. I think especially for one position that hasn't been touched for a while. That's wide receiver. Look at our last wide receiver pick. We're back quite a while. We're talking about pick 9 to the Chicago Bears. I don't see too many teams that I expect to take a wide receiver in this range. It is possible that they do, I think the likelihood is that one ends up doing it, but I don't think it's more likely than not for any specific team. You talk about teams that could after Jacksonville, you're probably talking about maybe the Steelers potentially doing it, especially with like Chase Claypool having walked at a point. Johnson, I don't know the long term future of. You can maybe look at the Philadelphia Eagles to fill in the slot, but I think they've got other things they need to address. And then the Texans, like I talked about, I don't think it's where they're going to go. I think they've already made a lot of investments there. That wouldn't stop me, but that's just what I predict. So you get to 27. You got the Cardinals here, who, if they didn't take a receiver at 4, I think they're considering it. And obviously, it's not the case. They're not going to consider a receiver because they already got Marvin Harrison Jr. So we're looking at teams to trade up here. Buffalo's probably going to go that route here. Brian Thomas Jr. would be a phenomenal choice. You also got Keon Coleman on the board. I think the Lions probably won't, but the Ravens would be a team. The Chiefs would be a team. The Panthers in round 2 are another team. You ever talk about Patriots, Commanders? I mean, you could go quite a ways down and find a lot of options. At this point, I look at the Carolina Panthers because you have only 3 receivers off the board. You have a ton of options here. You don't have a ton of draft capital, but you need to hit on some of your picks. You need to get really high upside players and then try to be safe too. But I think Brian Thomas Jr. is a great mix of both those things. And so if I'm the Carolina Panthers, and this is what I would probably expect in this scenario from them, I think that they move up with the Arizona Cardinals to pick their receiver of the future, to go alongside Adam Thielen and Jonathan Mingo. So I have them giving up 33, 101, and 222. Kind of basing this off of a recent trade between Jacksonville and Tampa Bay from a couple years ago, trade up for Devin Lloyd. That was also from 27 to 33. Similar compensation in that scenario. So that's what we're going to do here. Carolina gets into the first round. They're going to get that 5th-year option on this player, and they're going to take Brian Thomas Jr. I think if Brian Thomas Jr. stuck around in college for another year, he would easily be the wide receiver 1 of this next class if he could back up what he did. Now, there are some questions, right? Like Jaden Daniels isn't at LSU next year. They might have problems. It might be similar to how Marvin Harrison Jr. didn't have someone to throw him the ball. Then you got Malik Neighbors who's out producing him. Now, we still got Marvin Harrison Jr. higher, but that's probably some of the reason why Brian Thomas Jr. is declaring now. And you can clearly see the development. You see him becoming a better player, and you wonder what the ceiling is. I think this guy could be a wide receiver 1 in the NFL. I think he's got immense upside and just a few things to work out. So, Carolina Panthers here, you're going to get Brian Thomas Jr. Pair him up with Adam Thielen. You got a good receiving core now. Obviously, you got to worry about the offensive line, but you can focus on that with a lot of depth throughout this draft. A lot of other picks you can still make. So now we get to 28 with the Buffalo Bills. And this is where I go with Keon Coleman. Still going receiver here. It was debatable between Brian Thomas Jr. and Keon Coleman for me. And I think with Coleman, he embraces the contested catch a little too much, but this is a really exciting player to take a chance on around this range where you could get phenomenal value. There was a point where Keon Coleman was talked about with the top 4 players, not necessarily as the 4th guy, but just among like Romo Dunze and Malik Neighbors. And then it just kind of fell off because the production wasn't there. There was some questions about separation. I think pairing him with like a Josh Allen that is probably going to lose Gabriel Davis because of cap reasons. Stephon Diggs is getting older. You get a really good player to bring into that offense. Really good fit for the Buffalo Bills. And someone who can take over that Gabriel Davis role and potentially be a wide receiver 1 at the next level. So that's where we're going to go with the Buffalo Bills. 29 with the Detroit Lions. This is a fun pick for me. I'm going to end up going with Darius Robinson out of Mizzou. And I think there's a few reasons for this. But the biggest thing to me is that when I watch the playoffs and I watch how teams are succeeding, it's from pressuring the quarterback. It's from getting at the quarterback early and often. The teams that have beat Kansas City in the playoffs are the teams that have been able to sack him, to be able to get him to make the bad decisions because he's just not right in the head during those games because he's getting hit a lot. It happens to every quarterback in the league. So I think that's how you do it. You get defensive line help to have that potential. And Darius Robinson, I think the way he did at the Senior Bowl, he's put himself into the first round for me. May not be early first round, but he's got to be in consideration for the first round now. Immense upside. A guy who can play all over the defensive line. There's talk about people comparing him to Chris Jones in the way he plays. I think that's a little crazy, but it's exciting to think about the potential that Darius Robinson has at the next level. I think he's going to be a really good football player for a team. Detroit needs someone across from Aiden Hutchinson. Darius Robinson isn't necessarily the same kind of player, but I think he's a really good addition to that defensive line who can line up on the edge and on the interior wherever he's needed. Give him more variety in their fronts, give him more variety in what they can do, and just add to a defense that needs help. Now, of course, the big question with them is like, you might go cornerback, right? Because that's where the need is. You got to keep in mind in free agency, some of these things are going to be addressed to where if you feel like Robinson is the best player, you can go that route. But you also got to keep in mind that the defensive line does help out the coverage because it makes the quarterback have to get rid of the ball earlier. And so coverage doesn't have to last as long. So maybe if you went with corner, you might go with like Kamari Lassiter. But I have Darius Robinson going here to the Lions. And the Lions go their own way with the way they draft. They don't do what everyone expects. And this would be something I could absolutely see them doing because it really goes along with that kind of logic. So I think it's a good pick for them. But that's who I have going to the Detroit Lions. Now I got 3 fun ones to finish this off along with that Darius Robinson pick. Pick number 30 for the Ravens. I'm going with Troy Franklin. I think this is a phenomenal place for him to land because you look at the players that are going to be on that team next year as of now. It's Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman at receiver. All the air positions I think they have fixed for the most part. I don't think Justin Madubuike walks. So you've got your defensive line sorted out pretty well. And if they lose like Jadeveon Clowney, they'll make an addition to the defensive line, around the beginning of the year like they did with Clowney. So Troy Franklin, if you're bringing him into this offense, he could start outside, he could start in the slot. There's very much the opportunity to play in both spots because, like with Bateman, he really hasn't had the production to warrant being a starter. I think it's questionable at this point, even though he was a first-round pick. And so I look at Franklin as someone who might take over that role if you think he's going to be great in the slot. But I think he plays all over. I think you play him inside. I think you play him outside. But you get a phenomenal route runner. You get someone with elite speed. This is someone I think if you pair him with Lamar Jackson, you get an immediate impact player in the first year from him. And someone to take some of the stress off of Zay Flowers because in this situation, before you have Franklin, that's all you got at receiver. So you're putting a lot of stress on Flowers who, did crumble under the pressure just a couple weeks ago in the championship game. So you got to do something at receiver. Even if you bring back Odell Beckham Jr., I think you got to try to improve that unit. So go after Troy Franklin in this scenario for the Ravens. He gets a 31 for the 49ers. We got a player on the board here that I don't know if he's going to stay this long, but I think it's around where he goes. He could go earlier, but this is my expectation. Michael Penix Jr. You got a really good quarterback here. When I look at quarterbacks and how I evaluate them, something that's become very important for me over the last couple of years is asking, how does this player elevate their franchise? And you look at all the quarterbacks in this class, I think undoubtedly Michael Penix Jr. is the player who has done the most to elevate his franchise. Sure, J.J. McCarthy, he won the championship game. Michigan won. But he also had an incredible team around him. They didn't have him do a ton. Now there's the questions of, hey, we think he could have done it, but we don't know for sure. You don't know at this point. Michael Penix Jr. elevated Washington as a team. He made the people around him better. He is a leader. He is someone who's going to be, I think, very good in the NFL. And even if the stats are not as good as a Caleb Williams or a Drake May or a Jaden Daniels, I might feel better with Penix. And I'm not saying I'd pick him, top 5, right? But I might be better off with him if my team's finding more success because he's stepping up in those big moments. That's what matters. It doesn't matter if your stats look good. It matters what your team does when the game's on the line, the season's on the line. I think Penix is an example of a player who has stepped up time and time again in those scenarios, minus the championship game. So I very much like him as a pick to a team. And at this point, you'd love to have a 5th-year option on him. This is where teams were trying to trade up for Will Levis last year. And you look at teams that would do it. I think you got probably 2 teams you're talking about. You're talking about the New York Giants. And you're talking about the Minnesota Vikings. I think the Saints are a little more far-fetched because they pretty much committed to Carr for this next season. It is possible, but they'd have to trade up a bit farther. And with the Giants, I know there's a lot of belief inside their locker room in Daniel Jones. Whether or not you agree with that, that's what we're hearing out of that building. Kirk Cousins is 35 years old. We do not know how long he's going to keep playing, how long he's going to be in Minnesota, how long is he going to be playing this good too. And I think about a great mentor for Michael Penix and a great situation for him to go to with another fantastic wide receiver core. It's with the Minnesota Vikings. And if I'm the Vikings and I'm looking for a player that I want to pick, I'm thinking about the fact that my team hasn't made a Super Bowl in roughly 40 or 50 years. And I'm trying to find the guy that I feel like can elevate my franchise and to take it to the next level and to change things here. And if I'm taking a shot on someone, Michael Penix Jr. is very high on that list for me. And this is where he should go. This is a team that makes a ton of sense. It's a phenomenal opportunity for him to mentor behind a great quarterback in the NFL today. Maybe not the best, maybe not in the playoffs, but a very good quarterback. And so we're going to make this move as the Minnesota Vikings. And we're going to pick Michael Penix Jr. at 31, get that 5th-year option, and get a guy to start developing and to just start building this team around him and Cousins for the immediate future. So that's our pick at 31, one of my favorite ones I got to do. And then finally, again with the Kansas City Chiefs. Against all odds, Kansas City won the Super Bowl again. Congratulations to them. I think you look at that team and what they've done, the thing that sets them apart from everyone, and this is kind of what I was getting with the Michael Penix talk and trying to find a player who will elevate your team. Patrick Mahomes knows how to win. He knows how to have that killer instinct in the playoffs. He doesn't fold in the way he plays. He's consistently played at an incredibly high level in the playoffs and done enough to win. Whether it's pretty or not, he's consistently stepped up. And I think that's the difference between Kansas City and the other 31 franchises in the NFL. Because these other franchises, when they play Kansas City, you see the same thing over and over again. They can't finish. They keep them around. They don't know how to just finally win the game. Unless it's regular season, it's the way it's been. And so, congratulations, Kansas City. Just want to say that this is the day after the Super Bowl. They deserve their respect for winning it 2 years in a row. But just kind of wanted to throw that out there, just my thoughts on that. But for the Kansas City Chiefs, my pick here, I don't see a tackle I absolutely love because, Amarius Mims, he's a right tackle. I'm not moving Juwan Taylor to left. If I'm looking at left tackles, it's a bit rich for me. I think Kyron Amagaji comes out of Yale. That's kind of a problem because of the skill level. We didn't get to see him at the Senior Bowl. There's a lot of things working against him. I think Graham Barton is an interior player for sure. And then Patrick Paul, he's just not a player I feel like has been learning enough and improving enough to where I'm super confident in him being a first-round pick. And last year, we saw Kansas City reach for a need. They reached for a need in Felix Anudike-Uzomah. I don't think you want to do that again. And maybe that pick will end up working out in the long term. but they have had some misses. And I think you got a really smart player that you can invest in at this point. You have two options to me. I'm looking at receiver for this pick because, if Darius Robinson didn't go, he'd probably be my option. They like to pick out of Mizzou a lot, and this is a player who's been comped to Chris Jones in some ways. Not that he's going to be that great, but he's going to be really good. He can do that same kind of role. Would have been a logical fit for the Kansas City Chiefs, whether or not Chris Jones stays. But we're going to look at receiver. I love the idea of either Ladd McConkey or Adonai Mitchell to the Kansas City Chiefs. I think these are two players they look at close because McConkey is going to be super reliable. He's going to be a guy who's going to consistently produce. You're not going to worry about all these drops and just mayhem constantly. But with A.D. Mitchell, or Adonai Mitchell, we'll call him A.D. Mitchell, he has immense upside when compared to Ladd McConkey, and I think that's what sets him apart. The Kansas City Chiefs have to draft a receiver at some point, or to sign two really good ones, because Rashee Rice is the only guy there that I think is going to be a legitimate starter and stay on the roster next season. Because like MVS, I think he's like $11 million if you cut him. So that's a lot of money to save. And for the way he played, sure, it was better at the end of the playoffs, but he's just not worth that. It's not a smart investment. So in this scenario, I think Kansas City looks at getting the guy with the immense upside. Still got a good floor because A.D. Mitchell's a very good route runner. He's got great size for the position. He moves really well for 6'4". But for him, the thing that he does for Kansas City is he allows the offense to maybe open up some of those old explosive elements they used to have when Tyreek Hill was there. Not saying he's Tyreek Hill, but the way A.D. Mitchell plays the game, he can make the big plays. He can go downfield. You can chuck it up to him, and he's going to have the frame, the size. He's going to have all that to come down with the catch. And if you want Kansas City to be even better, which is what you're shooting for, you pick a guy like that. So that's going to be my pick for the Kansas City Chiefs, and that's who I think they would pick here. I could very well imagine A.D. Mitchell in Kansas City. So that's our final pick. Now, if you guys like this, let me know. Let me know your thoughts on it for your favorite team and everything. I'd very much be willing to consider going into the second and third rounds on this. Probably go a little faster through that. This is a long video. But that's what I've got for you. So I appreciate you all watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Enjoy the off season. And finally, go Jags.